killed her.
She's dead?
Dad, there's no way she's dead. There's no way I didn't do it. No way.
This video contains the interrogation of a college lacrosse player who murdered his girlfriend in a fit of jealousy.
Yeardley Love was born on July 17, 1987, in Baltimore, Maryland, the youngest of two daughters in a family rooted in faith, community, and perseverance. Her parents, Sharon and John Love, were proud of their girls and encouraged them to pursue education and sports with equal passion. From an early age, Yeardley's competitive spirit stood out. She was fearless on the playing field, whether running drills in youth soccer or learning to swing a lacrosse stick almost as tall as she was. Her older sister Lexi remembers that Yeardley didn't just want to play, she wanted to win, and she wanted everyone around her to play their best too. When Yeardley was in elementary school, tragedy struck. Her father died unexpectedly. The loss shook the family to its core, but it also brought Yeardley and her mother even closer. Sharon Love became both anchor and compass for her daughters, instilling in them a deep sense of resilience. By the time she reached Notre Dame Preparatory School in Towson, Maryland, Yeardley had grown into a standout student athlete. On the lacrosse field, she was quick, tactical, and relentless. Off the field, she was warm, approachable, and deeply loyal to her friends. Coaches loved her work ethic. Teachers praised her discipline. Her skill and leadership earned her a spot on the University of Virginia's women's lacrosse team, one of the most competitive programs in the country. In 2006, she stepped onto the Charlottesville campus wearing the navy and orange with pride, ready to push herself to the highest level. It was there, in her sophomore year, that she met George Huguely V. George Wesley Huguely V came from a world that seemed, at first glance, the polar opposite of Yeardley's. Born September 17, 1987, in Chevy Chase, Maryland, one of the wealthiest enclaves in the D.C. metro area, he grew up in a neighborhood of manicured lawns, stately brick homes, and country club memberships passed down like family heirlooms. His parents, Marta Murphy and George Huguely IV, divorced when he was young, but George still benefited from the kind of privilege that opened doors without asking. His education began in elite private schools, the kind where lacrosse wasn't just a sport. It was a legacy. His family name carried weight in Maryland lacrosse circles, and young George took to the sport with ease, displaying raw physical power and a competitive edge that often turned aggressive, but woven into the praise for his athletic talent were warnings. Coaches sometimes pulled him aside after a practice or game to tell him to cool it when his temper flared. He wasn't the boy who cried when things didn't go his way. He was the boy who shoved harder, checked rougher, made it personal. By high school, George had also discovered a taste for alcohol. Friends would later recall that his partying style was never casual. He drank heavily, often to the point of blackout. In the insulated bubble of prep school sports culture, this behavior wasn't exactly unusual, but with George, it had a dangerous edge. When he was drunk, his charm could flip into volatility in a heartbeat. He was recruited to play lacrosse at the University of Virginia, one of the nation's top programs, and arrived on campus in 2006 alongside Yeardley. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy grin and an athlete's swagger. To outsiders, he looked like the kind of guy who would be the life of any party. That image was what Yeardley saw first. They met through the insular social network of UVA athletics. The lacrosse teams, men's and women's, often mingled, sharing the same training facilities, traveling to games in overlapping schedules, and attending the same off-campus parties. At first, George was just another friendly face in the crowd, but he noticed Yeardley quickly. She was pretty in a way that felt approachable, her athleticism giving her a natural confidence. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but when she laughed, it was genuine. He started talking to her more at parties, sometimes walking her home, sometimes texting her late at night with the casual, "What are you up to?" Messages that blur the line between friendship and flirtation. By her junior year, they were officially dating. To friends, they seemed like a typical UVA athlete couple, competitive, busy, sometimes strained by the demands of their sport. But those closest to Yeardley noticed small changes. She began fielding more and more calls from George when they weren't together, often in the middle of the night. He could be charming, even sweet, but sometimes he was drunk, jealous, and short-tempered. He'd ask who she'd been with, what she'd been doing, and why she hadn't answered his texts sooner. Yeardley, fiercely loyal, brushed it off. She believed George could be intense, but he wasn't dangerous. Not really, she told herself. He just cared about her. But the red flags were there. In 2009, while on a lacrosse team trip to North Carolina, George got drunk and became aggressive with a teammate. The incident was serious enough that police were called, and he was charged with public intoxication and resisting arrest. He was tasered during the arrest, a fact that some teammates later thought might have been a wake-up call for him. But instead of changing his habits, George seemed to shrug it off. By their senior year in 2010, the relationship between Yeardley and George had become strained. They fought more often, especially when alcohol was involved. Friends say Yeardley had started confiding that she wasn't sure if she wanted to keep seeing him. One teammate remembered her saying, "He can be so nice when he's sober, but when he's drunk, he's not the same person." What no one could know was that the tension had reached a breaking point, one that would shatter more than just a relationship. Spring in Charlottesville always had a restless energy. Students spilled onto the green lawns between classes, the air heavy with the scent of blooming dogwoods. For the UVA lacrosse teams, it was the most intense stretch of the season. Every practice was a test, every game a fight to keep postseason dreams alive. For Yeardley Love, her final season carried a bittersweet tone. She was weeks away from graduating with a degree in political science, her future stretching open with possibilities. There had been talk of a summer trip with friends, maybe even graduate school down the line. Her mother and sister had already begun planning the trip to Charlottesville for her graduation ceremony in May. But behind the scenes, life off the field was growing tense. April 2010, the fights turned public. Friends noticed the arguments between Yeardley and George were happening more often and more visibly. At a lacrosse team party one Saturday night, George, clearly intoxicated, confronted her in front of others. Witnesses later said his voice was loud enough to turn heads. "Who were you with earlier?" he demanded. "I was with the girls," she said, keeping her voice calm, her drink held tightly in her hand. George's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me." A teammate stepped between them, steering Yeardley away before it escalated, but the tension lingered. She brushed it off later, saying he'd just been drunk and jealous. She always brushed it off. George's drinking by this time. George's drinking had become the central axis around which most of their fights revolved. Teammates on the men's lacrosse squad were used to his binges. The way he could down a staggering number of beers before moving on to liquor, the blackouts that followed, and the way his temper could flare without warning. There had been other incidents, heated exchanges with strangers in bars, drunken shoving matches with friends, moments where his anger seemed to come out of nowhere. But he was also a starting defenseman for UVA lacrosse. And in the insular world of elite college sports, that status bought him more tolerance than it should have. The breaking point. By late April, Yeardley had started talking to friends about ending things for good. She confided to one teammate that she felt done with the drama. She wanted to focus on finishing the season, graduating, and moving on, but the relationship had become tangled in a way that was difficult to simply walk away from. George and Yeardley still saw each other at practices, in social circles, and on campus. She didn't want a messy breakup overshadowing her final weeks at UVA. Her plan, friends believed, was to gradually distance herself, not a dramatic cutoff, but a slow fade. George, however, seemed to sense the shift, and it made him volatile. May 2, 2010, the night before Yeardley spent most of Sunday working on a paper for one of her final classes. She texted friends about meeting up later in the week. Her tone was normal, her plans ordinary. George spent the afternoon drinking heavily with friends. Witnesses later said he had been agitated, talking about Yeardley in a way that made them uncomfortable. He accused her of hooking up with another lacrosse player, though there was no evidence of it. By late evening, his mood had darkened entirely. At some point, he decided to go to her apartment. Charlottesville in the spring has a way of looking too perfect, like the kind of place tragedy shouldn't belong. The grass on the university's lawn is cut into sharp, even lines, the white columns of the rotunda gleam in the sunlight, and the air carries that mix of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass that makes you forget anything bad could happen. For Yeardley Love, The University of Virginia had been exactly what she'd dreamed of since high school, a campus full of history, a team that demanded her best, and a place where she could test herself in ways far beyond the classroom. Her teammates would later say that she had a presence you noticed before you even realized you were noticing it, a kind of grounded warmth, a face you trusted instantly. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking, but she drew people in simply by making them feel seen. Growing up in Baltimore County, Yeardley had been the kind of kid teachers loved, respectful, curious, disciplined. Her mother Sharon would wake early to pack her lunch, and Yeardley, still in her plaid Notre Dame preparatory uniform, would be practicing lacrosse shots in the driveway before breakfast. She and her sister Lexi had lost their father to illness when Yeardley was in elementary school, a loss that etched resilience into her character but also deepened the bond between the three women left behind. Sharon taught her daughters that life could turn without warning, and the best defense was to be prepared, work hard, and hold the people you loved close. By the time she was a senior in high school, Yeardley was a standout midfielder with quick reflexes, a sharp eye for plays, and the endurance to dominate an entire game without slowing down. College recruiters noticed her early, but it was UVA's storied lacrosse program that felt like the right fit. She committed with the kind of determination that made her coaches beam. Once Yeardley decided on a goal, she didn't waver. George Huguely came from a very different path. His family name carried weight in the Washington, D.C. area, tied to generations of wealth and connections. He was raised in Chevy Chase, where the houses seemed to sit back and watch the world from behind well-manicured hedges. Lacrosse was more than a sport there. It was a social currency, a tradition fathers passed down to sons with pride. George excelled in the game from a young age, his size and athleticism giving him an advantage that turned heads at every level. But wrapped inside the praise were warnings his family never quite faced. Coaches noting his temper, friends joking about his blackout drinking, the way he seemed to turn mean when alcohol burned away his charm. UVA recruited him for his defensive strength. By the time he arrived on campus, he was used to being the center of attention, used to winning, and used to the privileges that came with both. He met Yeardley through the overlapping circles of UVA athletics, the men's and women's lacrosse programs often sharing spaces, parties, and a social hierarchy that revolved around performance and reputation. Their first months together were easy, fueled by mutual attraction and the constant adrenaline of their sports schedules. They'd be seen at team gatherings, at corner bars with friends, or walking together on campus, the kind of couple people noticed because they both looked like they belonged at the top of their game. But under the surface, George's patterns began to creep in. The jealousy came in small bursts at first. A sharp question if she didn't answer her phone quickly enough, a suspicious glance if she laughed too long with another guy. When he drank, those edges sharpened. Friends noticed the way his voice could rise suddenly, the way his broad-shouldered frame could become intimidating without him even realizing. Yeardley, loyal to a fault, brushed these incidents aside, confiding to close friends that George just got a little out of control sometimes, but that he would calm down. She wanted to believe the charm outweighed the chaos that be why their senior year, that balance had tipped. His drinking was heavier, his temper quicker. There had been incidents, one in which he kicked in her door during an argument, another where he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave a bruise. Teammates worried but often hesitated to intervene directly. In the high-pressure, high-profile world of Division I lacrosse, these things sometimes got quietly excused, smoothed over with promises it wouldn't happen again. The week before her death, Yeardley confided in a friend that she was thinking of ending things for good. She wanted to finish her season, graduate, and move on without the drama. She didn't know how George would take it, but she knew she was tired of the volatility. She decided to put more distance between them, to keep things civil but create space. George, sensing the shift, seemed to spiral. His friends later said he had been talking about her constantly in the days leading up to May 3rd, convinced she was seeing someone else. That night, he had been drinking since the afternoon. Witnesses described him as agitated, his voice raised, his words slurring. Sometime after midnight, he left where he was and headed for her apartment. The door was locked. He kicked it in, splintering the frame, the sound echoing through the quiet complex. Inside, Yeardley must have woken instantly, the crash pulling her from sleep. The argument was loud, sharp, escalating faster than she could defuse it. George's size and drunken strength turned the confrontation violent. He struck her, the force causing severe head trauma. She fell, either against the wall or bed frame. The medical examiner would later say her injuries were consistent with both blunt force, impact, and possible smothering. When it was over, George left her on the floor and walked out. He didn't call 911, didn't knock on a neighbor's door, didn't check if she was breathing. He simply left. The next morning, her roommate found her unresponsive, her room in chaos. The 911 call brought police and medics within minutes. But it was too late. The scene was treated as a homicide from the start. The splintered doorframe, the visible head injuries, the disarray told a story before anyone spoke. Police found George later that day. His statements in the interview room swung between defensive and resigned. He admitted to kicking in the door, admitted to shaking her, admitted to taking her laptop. He denied intending to kill her. But his version of shaking didn't align with the catastrophic injuries she'd sustained. The prosecution would later use his own words to show that he had gone there in anger, forced his way in, and assaulted her with deadly force. The trial, 2 years later, turned the courtroom into a spotlight on their relationship. Teammates testified about the fights, the late-night calls, the moments when George's drinking turned to aggression. Forensic experts described the injury patterns, the cause of death, the sequence of events they believed unfolded in that bedroom. The defense argued it was a tragic accident, fueled by alcohol, not premeditation. They painted George as a deeply flawed young man who made a terrible mistake, not a murderer. The jury didn't see it that way. After 9 hours of deliberation, they convicted him of second-degree murder, grand larceny, and related charges. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison. For Sharon and Lexi Love, justice was tempered with the unchangeable fact that Yeardley was gone. In the months after the trial, they created the One Love Foundation, named for her jersey number. Its mission was clear: to educate young people about relationship abuse, to help them recognize the warning signs that had been overlooked in Yeardley's case. The foundation began speaking in schools and on campuses, producing awareness campaigns, and pushing for policy changes within athletic programs. That Yeardley's story became more than a tragedy. It became a tool to prevent others from meeting the same fate. Her face, once simply that of a smiling young woman in a lacrosse uniform, became a symbol, not of victimhood, but of the urgent need to see, speak, and act when love turns controlling and dangerous. Her name, written across banners at awareness events, carried with it a quiet promise from those who knew her and those who only knew her story, that her life, though cut short, would keep saving others. In the years since that May morning in 2010, the University of Virginia has tried to move forward, though traces of Yeardley's presence linger in quiet corners. Her framed photo in the athletics hall, the scholarship in her name, the moments before a game when her old teammates still glance skyward. For her family, the days have been measured in milestones missed. The graduate school acceptance letter she never opened, the wedding she never planned, the children she never held. George Huguely remains in prison, his appeals unsuccessful, his name now more cautionary than celebrated. His story is often told as a warning about alcohol, anger, and entitlement. Hers is told as a warning about the subtle beginnings of abuse and the way love can be weaponized when control takes root. The One Love Foundation continues to speak in her place, its programs reaching students across the country. Young athletes, new college freshmen, and high school seniors now hear her story in classrooms, locker rooms, and auditoriums, and learn to see what Yeardley, like so many, did not. That jealousy is not proof of love, that control is not care, and that the moment you feel unsafe is the moment to step away. Her mother has said more than once that she wants people to remember Yeardley not for how she died, but for how she lived. Fiercely, joyfully, with the kind of heart that left a mark on everyone she met. And perhaps that is the truest ending, that a young woman whose life was stolen in a moment of violence still moves strangers to change their own, still makes them think twice about what love should look like. The white columns of UVA's rotunda still catch the morning light. The spring air still carries the scent of honeysuckle. And somewhere, in the rhythm of a lacrosse stick hitting the pocket, in the cheer of a crowd under a bright blue sky, her name still lingers: Yeardley Love. Number 1. forever loved.